Just waiting for the go live command from City TV right now.
Finally got my lighting right.
Who knew my Facebook Live videos would prepare me for the pandemic world? Okay, we got the go live from City TV. And if you're not a member of council or the clerk's office or the mayor's office, we're going to have you keep your video off until it's your turn on the agenda. And it is 7:01, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Lansing City Council to order. And we're going to do roll call individually. Please make sure that you unmute your mic when your name is called.
Councilmember Betts.
Here.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Here.
Councilmember Garza.
Here.
Councilmember Hussein.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson.
Present by Zoom.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Present.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Here.
And Councilmember Wood.
Here.
There are 8 members present, a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We're moving on to meditation and Pledge of Allegiance. Is there anybody that members of council, mayor's office, or the clerk's office wishes to have us keep in our thoughts during our moment of meditation? Councilmember Wood, Betts, then Jackson.
Thank you. If we could remember Pastor Bicey, Charles Bicey, and his family. Pastor Bicey passed away this weekend, and if we could remember him at this time. He also served on our ethics board and will be definitely missed in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wood. Councilmember Betts.
There are a lot of unemployed people right now and people who've been laid off from their jobs. And I'd like to keep everybody in our thoughts, the people who are having trouble paying rent and having trouble paying food and things like that today.
Thank you. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Of course, all the people suffering from the coronavirus, COVID-19, but especially don't forget about people that's locked up in jails and prisons in a tight space without already adequate health care, and just kind of the last people to get looked at, including all their families that suffer every day too. So just think about everybody in this time of crisis.
Thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Mr. Mayor. Oh, taken care of. Thank you. All right, please join me in a moment of silence. Now for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're going to get better at that, hopefully. Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk.
You have for your approval the proceedings of March 16th. We do not have the April 9th available, so the March 16th.
Vice President Hussein.
President Spatafor, I'd move for the approval of the printed council proceedings of March 16th.
It's been moved by Vice President Hussein. Is there any discussion? Just real quick, folks, I've made all city council members and hosts. So if you do want to get my attention, use your actual hand in the camera, because as a host, you can unmute yourself, but you can't raise your hand. So that being said, seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Let's go back and do that by roll call. Sorry that we did say we're going to do roll calls. Mr. Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
On approval of the council proceedings of March 16th, Councilmember Betts.
Yes.
Councilmember Dunbar. Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
8 yeas, 0 nays. The proceedings are approved.
Thank you.
And we are to special ceremonies and presentations. We have a presentation for the community development block grant budgets.
Very good. We are recognizing Don Kalhanick as, I believe, giving that presentation. And let me see, Brian McGrain, I will also unmute you. There you are.
And hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Don, we can.
Okay, this is Don Kalhanick from the Development Office, here to speak on this issue tonight. Also on the line is Brian McGrain, the Director of EDP, who should be out there somewhere, and Doris Witherspoon, Senior Planner
Oh, let me get
in the
Doris.
Development Office, who should also be out there somewhere. This is the 46th year of the City of Lansing receiving federal community development block grant funds. It's been receiving home funds and emergency solution grant funds as well. Each year, the City of Lansing prepares an annual action plan to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for this funding. We're here this evening to present that budget, and I believe you already have it, for these three federal sources of funds. First, there's CDBG. CDBG, the award this year. I should also state right at the outset that these are the actual numbers for the city FY21 year. We don't always have the actual numbers when we get to this point in the process. It was a little earlier this year. So these are the actual numbers. So it's $2,045,460 for CDBG. These funds are used for activities such as assisting with housing rehab of low and moderate income individuals, economic development, and public services. There is $751,990 for home funds. These funds help with new construction for homes, for low and moderate income individuals, as well as down payment assistance. And there is $176,452 for the Emergency Solutions Grant. Eligible program components include street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, and support of the Homeless Management Information System, known as HMIS. There's some additional money we budgeted for program income. Every year we get some money back. When a house sells, for instance, we'll get some money back when that happens. And there is some people who have liens on their houses who might sell their house before the program objective is fulfilled. And so we'll always have a little bit of program income. And so you'll see some additional program income in the budget. The City of Lansing follows a citizen participation plan in developing and preparing the annual action plan. In accordance with that, the city, there's an opportunity to make comments on the annual action plan, which is available for public comments through today, April 13th. I would also state that that plan is available on the City of Lansing Development Office's website. I know that it's available in other locations that are no longer open to the public, but it is available on our website. And we're simply asking that council move forward to set the public hearing on this for April 27th, 2020. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Don. I see Council Member Wood and Hussein. Are there others? Council Member Wood.
Thank you. Don, a couple of questions. Do you anticipate with the coronavirus and some of the federal dollars that are going toward that there might be any changes in this budget? Have they led you to believe anything different than the numbers that you currently have quoted?
Yeah, well, Carol, there is, I'm sorry, Member Wood. It's very informal here, isn't it? There is additional funding, and but it's not dealt with in this and what you have in front of you right now. There is additional funding, which is on the way, if you will, for ESG and CDBG. And if I flip through a few pages, I would have those numbers. But it is about 1.2 million in additional CDBG funding that relates to the COVID crisis, and about 600,000 in additional funding for ESG. And of course, ESG primarily is intended to deal with the homeless population, and I believe those in jeopardy of becoming homeless. So those funds are out there. They're not part of what you have in front of you that we're setting for a public hearing. We're still reviewing that. We've been waiting guidance from the federal government, and how should I put this? Looking at the needs, trying to assess where this money will be best placed. So yes, there is more money coming.
I'm aware of the increase that there's a supplemental grant that we're going to be getting. My concern is that they might reduce the amount that they're giving because of all the other expenses that they are dealing with. So my question is, is this cut in stone, or do you believe that there is the possibility that there might be some changes to this number in the future?
I believe this first additional money, the 1.2 million in CDBG and 600,000 in ESG, is established in the statute, the CARES Act, I believe it's called, and that was based on the I think it's the first $1 billion or $2 billion or so of what was allocated for these programs is mandated to be distributed pursuant to the formula that they use for FY 2020. So this money, I think, is as set in stone as is our regular 2020 allotment. This would. I think there might be even more money coming in the future. I can't state with certainty because that's not cut in stone. That there is uncertainty with that because I think HUD wants to look at the actual need in different communities when they distribute the future money. But this money looks like it's coming. I don't have any reason to doubt.
My next question is based on the requirements that the federal government has for participation and the fact that we have closed different facilities and buildings where the public might have an opportunity to see that. Do you believe that we will be meeting the requirements needed as we move forward?
Yes, we're going to meet all the requirements. I'm sorry, there was a bit of an echo there. We are going to meet all of the requirements. I'm confident of that. Some requirements have already been waived. And I guess the signal we're getting from HUD is that they are not going to stand in the way, if you will, of us doing whatever we can to address the crisis that's in front of us. That doesn't mean we can just go out and spend the money. We're still assessing exactly what needs to be done in order to go forward, but they've already made some waivers of some requirements, and there may be even more waivers coming. So we feel pretty good about that overall.
All right,
Can I make a comment?
Thank you, Mr. President. That's my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Wood. Ms. Witherspoon?
Yes. Oh, I just wanted to say, Carol, that yeah, a lot of our regulatory requirements have been waived. We are still required to do citizen participation. However, it is less. It's not the 30-day normal comment period. And so they are aware of all these resources that we have available, such as Zoom and other ways of getting information out there on the internet, etc. So we are meeting. We submitted information already, and we are up on top of things. We're getting information in every day on these additional dollars. So we're adhering to that and trying to stay within those deadlines. So that's it.
Thank you, Doris.
Thank you, Ms. Witherspoon.
Yeah.
Councilmember Hussein.
President Spatafor, my question was asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions before we move on? Okay, just a reminder to council, we will be setting the public hearing for this budget, and that public hearing will be the 27th at 7 p.m. and we've checked with legal. We can satisfy public hearing requirements with Zoom just like a normal meeting. So that will be happening on the 27th at 7 p.m. Moving on to our next item is the FY21 budget, and let me find Jake and let me find
Hello.
Jake. And
Excellent.
All right, Mr. Brower, go ahead.
All right, let me see. Uh-oh. I think you're gonna have to allow me to screen share.
Got it. Should be set now.
Maybe. Here we are. Everyone seeing it? Excellent. Well, my name is Jay Brower. I'm the full-time budget director. I started working for the city October last year. At the time, the finance department was focused on completing the annual financial audit. Through November, December, and January, I met with every department to understand their budget, operations, and the programs they provide. In February, after consulting with the city treasurer and monitoring actual revenues and expenditures to date, I provided a mid-year budget amendment accounting for updated financial estimates and the results of the previous year's financial audit. Through February and early March, the department developed a budget proposal to meet the city charter's March deadline. We have met that deadline. Our budget estimates in regard to revenue for the upcoming year were developed in coordination with the assessor and the treasury departments, as well as preliminary estimates from the state of Michigan. And then 5 to 10 years of historical trends for individual lines, identifying numerous adjustments across returns for various revenue charges and sources. Department requests have been considered according to these limited resources available. I continue to communicate with all departments as changes develop and we produce this budget proposal. At this time, the department is working with administration and departments to evaluate what we do know and what we don't know in regard to how the COVID-19 emergency will impact our budget. The assumptions developed over the course of the past 6 months will have to be carefully evaluated as we incorporate this anticipated impact into our budget. At this time, it is not fully integrated into our budget. Overall, our total budget is proposed to $229.1 million. This is a 1.4 million or 1.4% increase from last year. We will be continually reviewing this plan and responding to your input over the course of the next couple of months as we prepare to adopt a budget in May. And we'll continue the budget monitoring process over the course of the next fiscal year through the normal procedure. As far as general fund expenditures, we are looking at $144.2 million. This contributes $500,000 to the fund balance as required by city ordinance and maintaining a target fund balance of 12 to 15% of expenditures. At the same time, the budget continues investment in public infrastructure as well as in community arts and culture. The primary sources of revenue remain very similar to previous years. 32% of revenue is coming from property taxes, 27% from income tax, state revenue, and the Board of Water and Light contribute 31%, and 10% of general fund revenue comes from other sources. Property taxes are collected across approximately 46,000 parcels in our 3 counties. Of the $45.6 million projected budget, we estimate that $7 million of that will be dedicated towards police and fire uses, $4.7 million to roads and parks, and $33.9 million to general fund operations. Our income tax estimates come from the Treasury Department. The city processes approximately 90,000 individual, corporate, partnership, and fiduciary returns annually. This estimate from Treasury, while conservative, predates the COVID-19 emergency. At this time, we do not expect that the postponed income tax filing deadline will impact our overall budget. It may interfere with our cash flow projections, but we are carefully monitoring that with the assistance of our financial advisor. As you can see in the presentation, we have the past 17 years of change in income tax revenue collections. We're looking at previous years to come up with an estimate that reflects where we expect to be within the coming year. As this revenue source is most tied in with economic factors, we'll be looking at it very closely over the next months. So last year, the city hosted a series of budget nights across different neighborhoods within the city. Environmental concerns and climate change was a major issue across the community. As a result, we are proposing to convert an existing position to work full-time as a sustainability manager and focus entirely on these climate issues. Additionally, we evaluated overtime spending across departments and determined that we could conservatively fund 3 additional patrol officers through reduced overtime. We are coordinating with the police department in this effort to implement and monitor this change over the next fiscal year, should you accept the proposed budget. Additionally, we have heard the council's concern about not having a full-time finance director. For the proposed budget, we are restoring this position based on your concern. In addition, we are very happy to be converting a formerly outsourced position with purchasing back to being a city employee. City legacy costs remain a significant financial challenge. We anticipate a 2.3 million increase in retirement spending and 1.3 million increase in retirement healthcare costs. This is comparable to previous years, but could be impacted by volatility in market outcomes, requiring us to contribute additional funds. Further, the finance department is actively reviewing contracts and internal controls in order to make the best use of our public funds. Our goal is to leave no stone unturned where we could be saving money or providing more efficient service to the community. Overall, the proposed budget responds to many long-term fiscal challenges ahead, and it continues to invest in the community, infrastructure, climate, and culture. The next date on our budget's calendar is approximately 2 weeks from now, when we'll be going over this in more detail, but we are available for any questions that you have at this time.
Council President, you're on mute.
Wow, I'm usually the one that has to say that. All right, we're gonna start with Councilmember Betts and then Councilmember Spitzley.
Thank you, President. Jake, I've got one question for you. In my expertise and understanding, it's not a great idea to be adding to rainy day funds during a recession. We are currently in a recession. Should we be changing ordinance to not put $500,000 into a rainy day fund today? What is your professional expertise on that?
Mr. Brower. Oh, I got on mute. Hold on. Oh, you're good.
Yeah, that is entirely up to council. I won't step on an administrative issue. The rainy day fund does exist for rainy days. And so it is entirely up to you whether or not you determine that would be an appropriate use of funding. In addition, we have reached out regarding another concern the council has brought up about how we expended sewer lawsuit before. We've determined that the money that we spent last year could have been charged to the sewer fund where it was charged to the general fund. And so we'll be making a transfer in this current year to rectify that and improve our fund balance.
Okay, great, thank you.
I've got Councilmember Spitzley, then Councilmember Garza. Councilmember Spitzley, and then Councilmember Jackson after Garza.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I have a couple questions. The first thing is I mean, I'm a little disappointed. Councilmember Betts asked you a direct question, and he asked for your opinion, and I kind of wanted to hear what your opinion was, about the rainy day fund, but you chose not to answer. The other thing is, you're going to be adding a new purchase. You're going to be bringing the purchase person who's on contract. That person will now be a regular City of Lansing employee. Is that going to go out and be posted, or are we just going to fold in the existing purchaser position into City of Lansing?
The existing purchasing position, the employee is retiring in a series of months, and so we'll be hiring out a new position.
Great.
And as far as using the rainy day fund, that's what a rainy day fund is for. So I will support the council's decision.
Gonna go to the mayor and then Councilmember Spitzley. If you have a follow-up, we'll come back to you. But right now, Mayor Shore wants to speak.
Well, and I don't know that that's a fair question for Jake, because he's not a policymaker in his role. He's the budget director. Yes, if you want to have that conversation, I'm happy to have that conversation. I mean, my understanding is this was a provision put in through the FHT with council at the time, and we are still looking to put money back into reserves, and we expected to put quite a bit back into reserves this year, because we had to take some out of reserves. And Jake mentioned the sewer money, where that was going to come back in and go into reserves, and we expect to have other pieces where we'll be refilling reserves. Now, with the recession that was already mentioned, less will probably go back into reserves, but that just means less had to be taken out of reserves. So we're going to follow the law and put the 500,000 into reserves, but that doesn't mean that we may not end up going into reserves sometime in the future if needed, because that's what they're there for. So the policy decision, I think, is a council decision with our input. But I mean, the reality is we're going to try and build those reserves. We'll probably build it less because of the recession, and that 500,000 will go in. It doesn't mean that it doesn't come out later, but I do think it's important to start putting that in with the ordinance that we have on the books, and then we navigate later on what to do with the recession, with the reserves, with dollars to make sure that we can keep our services and keep our employees hired. So again, I don't know that it's his decision to make that recommendation, but we're going to follow the law, and unless you guys take that off the books and we agree to that, then we'll follow the law and we'll navigate what we have to do out of reserves in the future.
And I don't necessarily disagree with you, Mr. Mayor. I think my basis for asking that is if we're looking at this because of the issues with apparently we're going to have the lost revenue and income tax and others. I do think that we probably should at some point put that on the back burner to have a discussion. I agree the money needs to go to the rainy day fund, but I, as a council member, I can't make that decision without having information. And so that's kind of what I was getting at, that if the administration or our budget people, our finance people are looking at the numbers in depth, and they're seeing something ahead of time, I think we should tee up the discussion. And that was my only reason for making that comment. So, and then my other things on the you're going to be putting back in the finance so I agree with those as well. But again,
Councilmember Spitzley, you got cut off there. You started with something and then you said I agree with that as well.
Yeah,
so I'm happy to take your agreement, but we probably should understand what you're agreeing on.
It says my internet connection is unstable. I don't know what's going on over here, but so anyways, at some point, we're also adding on a lot of 2 or 3. We talked about 2 or 3 positions, and I don't disagree with those either. But those are also, I think we're going to have a discussion as we're going on, as we're looking at shrinking revenue. The finance director, the sustainability officer, which I Councilmember Jackson, I don't disagree that we need, and some of the others, but those are a lot of positions that we're kind of bringing on board in this extraordinary time. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Comments, not questions. So we'll move on to Councilmember Garza.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. I just wanted to make sure that we're clear.
Thank you, Mr.
Councilmember
President.
Garza.
So I think a rainy day fund is a great idea. However, I would like to see it utilized to the public safety aspect, or see our first responders get that money. And while we're on that subject, I mean, $500,000, that's quite a bit of money. It's not that much out of our budget, completely. But I mean, right now, Lansing employs 237 police officers for Lansing and 168 firefighters. I mean, I think it would be a good idea to give each one of those guys an extra $1,000 for being a frontline worker and being out there in the middle of this pandemic. I mean, going in and out of houses. I mean, that'd be great to see each one of those guys get an extra $1,000 in their paycheck for risking their lives to, to protect ours. That's all I really have. But a rainy day fund would be great. I mean, the governor vetoed the $750,000 that the Lansing Fire Department was looking forward to. They need a new ladder truck desperately. I mean, I think it's like $1.3 million for a new ladder truck. So that wouldn't have, still would have covered quite a bit of it, but not quite what we were looking for, and it got vetoed. So I'm not gonna keep rambling, but it would be nice to see our frontline workers get some money. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't hear a question, so we'll move on to Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. I have 3 questions on this presentation. The first one is, you mentioned that the changes to the budget based on COVID and coronavirus is not yet fully integrated. I guess my question is, what, if anything, have you guys looked at, just because things are looking different? Because it's been about 30 days since it's been really real, I guess. So
Shelby, I see you unmuted yourself. Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're all anxious to figure out what does this really mean for us? What's, how is it going to impact not only cash today, but I mean, remember, we're still in the current fiscal year FY20. So what does it mean for our final amendment, as well as FY21, as well as FY22, and how long will this really go on for? So I can share with you what we know, and I can share with you what we don't know and that we're monitoring, and then we can kind of go from there. The reason I bring up cash in essentially 2 fiscal years is that this is happening right at the tail end of FY20. So although some things are going to be impacted today, they might not actually show up until our budget until next year or even the year after. So I want to make sure when we talk about the things that we're concerned about or that we're watching, I don't want everyone to panic that we're out of cash today, because that's simply not true. It's just a matter of timing and when all these things are actually going to hit us. So I was invited to a participatory call with Department of Treasury where they gave some updates as it relates to their portion of funding that locals could be looking at or expecting to receive. So here's the things that they shared. So these are the things that we know. We don't have exact numbers yet, but we definitely know these are on our radar. One is our constitutional revenue sharing, which is about $10 million for us each year. They had said that our payments that were projected for June and August would be essentially reduced. So they have about a 2-month lag in when they receive sales tax to when it actually makes it to local governments. So all the activity that didn't happen essentially in March, April, and potentially into May will start to feel in June and August and September, depending on how long this goes on for. Again, they didn't say how much we could, estimate, but for cash purposes, we're going to count on only receiving half the amount that originally was budgeted, just so that we can make sure we have enough cash to make sure we're making payroll and all our other expenses. Statutory revenue sharing is also going to be down. So since the state's overall budget is down, I think they're estimating $3 to $4 billion. We're certain that we're going to receive some sort of reduction for locals across the state for next year. So right now, conservatively, we're looking at a 15 to 20% reduction. And as we have an end date on when this, we'll be back in action, we can better kind of pinpoint what we think that number is going to be. But for right now, just at a high level, back of the envelope kind of calculation, we're looking at between a 15 and 20% reduction in overall state revenue for us. They also mentioned income tax, which we all know. When we think about it from our perspective of when we're concerned about receiving it, yes, there's a delay in when we'll receive FY20's income tax, because now they have until July 15th to file. So some of the money that we would have received in April or May now could come in June or July. However, not to get too far into the accounting standards, but as long as we receive those dollars within 60 days of the fiscal year end, we count it towards fiscal year 20. So our final budget amendment will reflect if there's any impact or not. Right now, for cash purposes, we're again assuming a 15% reduction or delay in when we think we would receive those payments. However, next year's income tax FY20, because as you guys know, when you file your taxes, it's all based on last year's income, right? So the money that we're receiving now was based on all the activity that folks had in 19, calendar year 19. So the money that we're not getting right now in income tax will show up next April or next really new year when we start talking about that reduction in income tax. They also said, hey, folks have an income tax. If people aren't working in the city because they're working from home, they may claim essentially a non-resident or I'm not working in the city for these months. And that could be an even bigger reduction to our income tax. So that's something that we're going to have to monitor very closely with our treasurer to make sure the percentage in which folks that aren't residents versus non-residents versus how many months were we off or potentially working from home. And again, having an end date will help us immensely better calculate this. But until we really know, right now we're hoping May 1st. We all know that that may, be extended. It may be reduced or only certain personnel coming back. And so since we don't have all that information, it's tough to project. But I can assure you right now, my first concern is cash. We want to make sure we have enough cash to make payroll and pay all of our bills. You'll see at the next meeting, right now we're discussing issuing a tax anticipation note, a TAN. So you may see a resolution next month that essentially gives us the authority to go out and borrow against future property tax revenue so we can make sure we have enough cash. Now, cash isn't budget, and we know that we're obviously going to have some budgetary impacts, but to what extent those mean right now, it's a guess. It's totally a guess right now. Until we have an end date and we can truly see the full impact of this, it's going to be hard to predict. But we are obviously, any meeting we can get with, whether it's a legislative person or Department of Treasury or any other local government that has ideas on what they're doing as it relates to cash or budget, we're taking those meetings, we're asking the questions, we're all participating to try to get as much information as we can from our partners that are in the same situation as us. But again, the first focus is going to be cash. Second will be how this impacts this year now, FY20, as well as how it's going to impact our future budget, FY21. So obviously, as Jake mentioned, when we put this budget together, when Jake spent months of blood, sweat, and tears putting these numbers together, this wasn't even a thing yet. So the information that you have now, of course, doesn't have any of these potential impacts included. So we definitely need to talk about how and when we put those future estimates into a budget, or if it comes out potentially in our first amendment, maybe in July or August when we have the full information or when we know when we're back to work. So that's something that President will have to talk about, and Mayor, of course, what you guys want to do going forward. But right now, just so you guys know what we're focused on right now, it's definitely cash and how it's going to impact us today and making sure that we can keep the trains on the tracks, people employed, and people going to work.
So I know Councilmember Jackson, you have a few more questions, but the mayor did put his hand up, so I'm going to let him interject here, and then we'll come back to you.
I just want to add on that, as we look at all the uncertainties, I think I've spoken with Congresswoman Stotkin 2 or 3 times a week, and she and Speaker Pelosi are very strongly advocating for the next round of budgets, budget appropriations from the feds to have direct contributions to local governments to be able to support things like budgets that are down, the CARES Act. The states that all got that money are trying to use that for their budget. But Congresswoman Slotkin texted me this morning and said that Speaker Pelosi in conversations is pushing for dollars directly to cities. I'm not sure if cities 50,000 or more or what, but she fully expects us to be part of that. So you have to add that as another unknown as a factor that we will factor in. So I think there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle that just aren't known yet. Shelby kind of outlined a lot of the doomsday scenario, but there are other dollars that may come in, not only to help out with the COVID-related activities, but with our budgetary issues, understanding that it's going to be down due to less revenues. So it could backfill some of that. So we're kind of putting all of that into the mix. And when we hit an end date and we know, then we'll be able to evaluate. Plus, we're also logging all of our expenses through COVID to see what we can get reimbursed from the feds under previous appropriations. So all of that's mixed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Jackson.
Thanks. I hate to take up the time, but just to follow up on that. So you mentioned possibly finding out about how it affects this year a little bit, and then next year changing some things, but there are some knowns. I think Jake said there were some knowns and Shelby said there were some knowns. Can we make any changes that we know will affect it or could, to kind of like take the pressure off of not only your administration, but council having to accept future amendments that we can probably predict and maybe make them not as bad this time? I mean, as bad as far as not as like drastic.
Yeah, so we're looking to see how much we can incorporate into our budget in order to get you something that's as accurate as possible by May, when you're able to adopt the budget. And so there might be some changes that we propose to you in this next coming month as we work with departments and see what we're able to put together.
Thanks. And I guess my second question, if I may, Mr. President.
Go for it.
This is normally, if we were in person, I would just lean over and say, Councilmember Hussein, I have a question, and he would just answer it. And it's, so the pie chart here on page 2 of 10 in the presentation, with the police 21%, the fire 16% of our citywide expenditures, that includes, I guess my question is, does that include retirement and everything? Is that why it's so much?
Mr. Brower. Oh. There you go. You're unmuted now, Jake.
Yes, it includes retirement.
Okay, thank you. I guess now, could you provide, and I'm sure it's in the line items, but could you provide kind of like how much of the police department's budget goes to retirement versus how much goes to their operations? And I guess for the fire too, I'm sure I could probably dig that out as well, but just to have an official answer.
Yeah, not to give us an exact dollar amount, but I would say about half the personnel expenditure. We could pull out the actuary report and give you an exact number that we're funding the retirement system.
Okay, and I guess I also wonder, would that number include the current salaries, or current salaries as part of operations, and then your retirement would be the next number, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my third question, if I may, is the sustainability manager. Can you just, and I know the mayor, he's been open and I could have always called, but I guess just to put it out, can you just explain how that transfer goes from public service? Is it the same salary amount? Is the person selected? Is there a, I guess, job description, benefits change, anything like that?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, we are planning to take an existing position of someone who is an expert in the field and take away some of her administrative duties and add some new duties. We have a new job description that's coming out based on other job descriptions of similar sustainability managers in other areas. She matches all of this. We hope to have all of this set in the next few weeks, probably pretty soon. We expected to have it by now, but situation has changed. So we expect to have an announcement on that very, very soon, maybe next week or the week after, on the person it's going to be. It's somebody very obvious, because it's somebody that does a lot of this right now. It's just a matter of taking moving some duties out to others and bringing some new duties in, and repurposing an existing position. There might be a level change. I don't know. That's got to be evaluated through the normal process. But we're going to reevaluate current position for someone very qualified for this, and have her very likely, assuming we can make it all work out, be the sustainability manager, and then and we'll have that announced probably pretty soon.
Thank you.
All set, Mr. Councilmember Jackson?
Yes, thank you, President.
All right, we're going to do Councilmember Wood, then Councilmember Betts. Councilmember Wood.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a few open-ended questions, and these could be answered during different presentations. First of all, we had been contracting with the Board of Water and Light to do purchasing. So if we could get a price on what we were paying for the contracting for that position and what our intentions are for hiring someone, what that level would be and what the difference between those two positions. I think you've answered some of my questions on the sustainability employee. It sounds like that will be just a change in title and a potential of maybe some step changes, but you are not, if I understood correctly, you are not intending to fill the position that person would be vacating from. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, that's the intention. Is basically she's doing a lot of that stuff now. A lot of that is spread around. A lot of the sustainability manager duties are spread around the city. The intention is pretty much to centralize a lot of it, have her work with the consultants that we all paid to do the report with Anne, to do the report, to review the Johnson Control stuff, to talk about what's already been done, some things that are going to be done. So yeah, it's repurposing an existing position to do a lot of that, but it's not creation of a new position.
All right, thank you. Looking at, you indicated hiring 3 additional police officers. If we could get a breakdown on what that cost would be that you're figuring into the budget, as well as how many are there the potential of retirements for the next fiscal year, because we have been front loading police officers, so I'd like to know how many potential retirees we might have. Lastly, well, not last, I got 2 more. Board of Water and Light, based on the fact that we've got closed businesses, can we get a updated projection from the Board of Water and Light as to what they believe their gross loss and gross revenues might be over this as we're working through it? And Mayor, because the governor declared and was granted an emergency disaster area, you had indicated that we are keeping track of our cost. What is the reimbursement percentage on those in a disaster area?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, yeah.
You know, there's no hard and fast number. We are going to submit everything. We will submit everything through FEMA that we can. We'll submit everything through for all the COVID. I believe we are allowed to track all our new costs related to COVID through March 1st. So we have created accounts and we have tracking for everything, whether it was spent, donated, whatever it is, we are tracking all of it. Our emergency management is tracking it. They're tracking all the grants. They've been on conference calls with the Municipal League and others on how to tally and report all of that. We're gonna track every dollar that is spent or donated or related to this emergency, and we're gonna submit all of it, whether it's FEMA, whether it's the state, because it's CARES dollars that have come through, whether it's, again, we get direct appropriation and we can submit there, whether it's budgetary or PPE or you name it. We are tracking it and we will submit it in every way we can. And there's nothing that I know of that says you'll get 15% of everything you spent or you get 20% of everything you spent. We'll submit all of it. And again, our emergency management folks, they know the FEMA rules because they've dealt with that before with flood and with other things. But they'll have all of that information and they'll submit every dollar that we've spent or had donated or is even closely involved with this. We'll submit to see what money we can get reimbursed back from Fed, state, anyone.
And we're also tracking lost revenue, correct?
Yeah, we will. As soon as we have lost revenue numbers, we'll be tracking that. As of now, we can't get reimbursed, but again, Congresswoman Slotkin and Speaker Pelosi are pushing for cities, ours and others, to get direct reimbursement for lost revenue. We are not eligible for that right now. And I know the state is pushing to be eligible under the CARES Act, but we the CARES Act was only cities or counties 500,000 or more. So there are only 33 cities in the whole country that were eligible to get direct reimbursement. Detroit was one of them. We are not. So the state has control of those dollars, and they would like to be able to use that for their lost revenues, which is something like between $1 and $3 billion or something like that. So they're pushing for those dollars, and we would like to see us being funded in the next round. But I guess there's debate between Leader McConnell and the Treasury Secretary and the Speaker of the House. But I know the Speaker is pushing for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wood. Councilmember Betts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jake and Shelby, I have two questions for you. The first one being the Michigan Treasury has come out with an estimate saying $1 to $3 billion lost this year and $1 to $4 billion lost next year. Obviously, that's a large range. Can you give me or counsel this body a similar range to know exactly how much, any percentages or anything like that, so we can keep this in our minds as we're starting to shuffle things around?
Sure, and Jake, jump in here. So when we talked about the state revenue as it relates to the next couple of revenue sharing payments that we have coming, we were looking at 15% reduction. Got that number. Jake did some research and figured out our collections in 2008 and 2009, when that recession hit, we had lost about 14% across those 2 years. And so to be conservative, we said, well, if we're comparing this to the last recession of a loss of about 15%, let's conservatively bake that in again for this year. So that's where we're at right now, because we don't know. But as far as cash goes, that's what we're looking at as it relates for a reduction for not only cash for FY20, but then also budget for 21.
What about city income tax?
For FY20?
For this upcoming year?
So what I would propose doing is looking at collections at this time last year to see how much would we have received in the month of April and May, or however long this goes, and then compare it to where we were last year, so that we can do some modeling to see what was the reduction for these 2 months essentially of time or service, so that we can project those out for FY21. So until we have an end date, that'll be a little bit trickier to project right now. But if we know it's for sure May, we can certainly start doing some modeling and looking at that.
Okay, I think that we'd all be pretty interested in that, to just have a brief estimate in our heads. Okay, and then my other question, we're hiring 3 new police officers. Sorry, Mr. President, okay if I ask a second question? Okay, great, thank you. We're hiring 3 new police officers. Are all of the expenses associated with those 3 officers coming from the reduction in overtime, or are we also including more money into that on top of the overtime?
Entirely through overtime.
Okay, thank you.
And going into your previous question regarding income taxes, between April and June, we typically get 40% of our income tax. And so to date, based on preliminary numbers that I've been looking at in preparing your quarterly budget report, we're looking like we would otherwise be fairly on track given our amended budget. However, we do have the new circumstances to prepare for.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Spitzley. Anyone else? All right, Councilmember Spitzley. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. President. So Jake and Shelby, the income tax thing, and following up on Councilmember Betts' question, and Jake, you said you had some preliminary modeling done. Are you working with the city treasurer to get those numbers? How are you guys putting those numbers together?
Jake.
Yep, our budget estimate comes from the city treasurer directly. And so that number predates the COVID-19 emergency. I've been providing her with what information I can gather, and we've been communicating back and forth between our finance operations department, or treasury department, and our financial advisor in order to come up with a more updated estimate. But as Shelby says, there's a lot of unknown factors and we don't have an end date yet, so it's hard to determine an exact number for you.
Thank you.
I'll just add, sorry, President, Member Betts, I know you had kind of said whole numbers or round numbers. So if we just look, just again, back of the envelope kind of math here, if revenue sharing is about 20 million a year, and we're going to estimate a reduction of maybe 15%, that's $3 million bucks. Income tax is around 39 or almost 40 million. So if you look at a reduction of 15%, again, you're 5.8 million. So these aren't small numbers, obviously. Again, going back to what we know and what we don't know, if that's kind of the worst case or doomsday scenario, we know we've got some things that are going to be coming in back to our reserves too, that we, Jake quickly touched on, which was the ramp sale, moving that back over, the sewer lawsuit, moving that back over. Those total about $3 million, which is great. We just switched our property and casualty insurance, which Jake mentioned on the very last slide. That saved us about $400,000. Quick shout out to Christopher Mumby, who really helped lead that RFP and doing a lot of research and homework around who can give us the best rates. And joining, of course, Jim Smirka was a huge lead on that as well, helping us get that done. The IRS penalties, of course, we're still fighting. We're right at the end of essentially submitting everything that's due so we can start negotiating those. And now more than ever, I think they'll support local governments getting the money back. And again, we're anticipating some healthcare savings as well. So we've got a lot of things working to our advantage as well, things that we had teed up long before this crisis even happened. And just to go back really quick before we get too far down the road, Member Wood had some questions that relates to Board of Water and Light. This is exactly why when Mayor and I sat down and Samantha was part of these conversations and we started talking about the rates from Board of Water and Light is getting a fixed rate in our budget. This variable rate stuff, too hard to plan for them and for us. So when they committed to the 23 million for FY20, they're committed to the 23 million. So right now, there's no going back or saying that the rate's going to be lower or changed for this fiscal year. They've committed to 23.1 million for FY20. And again, we've negotiated for the next 2 years an increase to that, and it's in the budget for 25 million, and we've locked that in for 2 years as well. So this is now more than ever why a fixed rate made the most sense. Now, it just so happened we had these conversations before COVID happened, which was great. But for us right now, that's the most conservative way in my mind to do the budget is to lock in money that we know we're getting. And I think the last question, Carol, that you had, and we can figure out specifically, we're paying right now just about $100,000 for the contracted services for purchasing. So to bring that back in how 243, Jake, I'm looking at you, just did the research on what position it belongs to, what union, and what step it falls on. But our original math or estimation was that between salary and benefits, it'd be about a wash as far as bringing it in as a contracted services, but making it our own union employee. Thanks.
Yeah,
Sorry, Peter. I just want to catch you up quick.
That is correct. I got the old position description from the Human Resources Department, and it ended up being pretty close to a wash.
Thank you. Councilmember Wood looks like you got a follow-up there.
I have one final question. Again, I don't expect the answer today, but can we be tracking our unemployment numbers for Lansing? I realize, again, we are talking about numbers that are changing all the time and that, but I think it would be good for us to understand how many of our residents are unemployed or getting unemployment benefits at this time. I'm not sure how readily we'll get the information from the state, but anything that we can get would be appreciated.
Thank you, Councilmember Wood. And I looks like I don't see any other hands up, so we'll close out this conversation. And I want to thank everyone for their work on this. Vice President Hussein and myself have been meeting with the administration semi-regularly, not in person, obviously, but trying to figure out what the next best thing is to do. We've obviously got a budget just to approve by May, but understanding some of the concerns raised today by council members and members of the administration, we know that we're dealing with a moving target right now. So we're going to keep having those meetings and bringing them to council and discussing next steps and make sure that the budget we put together in May is as stable as we can make it, so that the concern that Councilmember Jackson's had about amending a budget that is drastically amending a budget might not have to be a reality. So we're stay tuned, because we do know the feds, as long as they keep printing money, we're going to keep asking for it. So hopefully the next stimulus package will have something in it for the city of Lansing as well. But thank you all very much, and we're going to move on. So I'm going to have Jake and Shelby turn off their videos here, and then we will find our next participants. So we're going to have a presentation on the Comprehensive Development Agreement, an amendment to the Continental Ferguson Lansing LLC Red Cedar Development. And if you are on the phone and going to be presenting for the Red Cedar, please use the raise your hand function, and I will unmute your screen. Right now I've unmuted Mr. Cass. Let me see here. Christopher Strelkowski, you're unmuted. Eric, I think you were going to be a presenter, Eric Heltzer, and Carl Dorshemer. So if you guys could turn your videos on, and then if there's anyone else.
Don't forget Jason Hockstock as well.
Jason Hockstock, very good. Where is he? Oh, he's raised his hand. There he is. Okay. Very good. So Jason, Mr. Cass, Mr. Strelkowski, Carl, and let me see who else is out there. All right. Jason. So who wants to start? We've got the 11th Amendment. Okay, Carl, there you go.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. So tonight on the agenda is the 11th amended Red Cedar Development Agreement to be received and referred by council. And the city attorney is here to answer any specific questions, regarding this development agreement, this version of it. But however, before that, Frank Cass and the developer team of Continental Ferguson, they're here to give a presentation, basically an update on where the project is right now. So Frank, would you like to lead off?
I would. Can someone hear me?
We can hear you, Mr. Cass.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. This has been a long process. And whereas we're making great progress because of COVID-19, we've stopped building for the time being, which we clearly understand. So I want to just give you an overview, and then hopefully we can, through this process tonight, show you the latest pictures of what we're doing. Although I will tell you that pictorially and actually in terms of the buildings, there really has been almost no change that you would see. They're all going to be great looking, and if you've driven by the site, one of them has started to go up. So the first thing, just as a refresher, the site we've tackled is floodplain. The drain commissioners tackled the floodway for the park. Our site begins at 6 feet 8 inches under floodplain, as does Michigan Avenue, as does Frandor to the north. So our site was completely unbuildable. In order to get it buildable, we explored many different ways to bring the site up above floodplain. At first, we thought we had to do integrated parking structures for all of the buildings or most of them. The more we got into the site, the more we found out about the site and other possibilities. We found out we did not. We're back here today because we found a way to save $12 million, actually spending $3 million to save 15, so it nets 12 million by removing the integrated parking structure that was going to be underneath the 2 hotels, and someday down the road, 3 years from now, 3 years from August, the second phase of 300 student housing beds, sorry. To understand this perfectly, I'll give you just a couple little facts, and I hope I can make them clear enough, but I'll answer questions if necessary. First of all, when we started working on the land and the dirt, we had found compensating cuts off-site that proved to have more capacity than we thought. And we were doing a lake, not the drain commissioner's lake, but our lake, that we also proved to have more capacity than we thought. Previous to July 2019, the projections showed that we were going to, our earth samples, that we were going to have 11,000 cubic yards of bad dirt. When we finally got onto the site, we found we had 100,000 cubic yards of bad dirt. The bad dirt being from the golf courses, 100 years or whatever of fertilizer that was put on there. As a result of that, we started moving a lot more dirt around, which cost us money than we thought we were going to have to move around. But through moving that dirt around, we realized that we had enough dirt to create capacity to build the 2 hotels, the Hyatt House and the Marriott AC, on dirt, not on an integrated parking structure. What we lost by doing that was the ability to put up 300 student housing beds as a second phase down the road. As I remember from all our earlier meetings, nobody was crazy about too many student housing beds. We had a timing problem with those beds to begin with, because the integrated parking structure at full cost of $15 million was going to be done in September of this year. The student housing beds second phase that paid part of the taxes on that were not going to be done until 2023, August, for school year. So that caused a funding problem as well. We found out that we could move the dirt around. We got Eagle's approval to do that. Move the dirt around and build up the hotel site and get that done for a $12,000 savings. That translates to a $20,000 savings over the period of the bond, which also we feel is in line with the conversations we had with MEDC and what we need to do to get past with them. And we are continuing, and Carl can speak about that if necessary, to work with them. We actually have a work meeting again this week on, I think, Thursday. So that is really what we have. So this project, the private sector project, is now about a $262 million project that will include, now also our numbers are up a little bit. You know, when you first do a floor plan or a site plan for a building as big as 2 hotels, 2 buildings, you don't know exactly till you start dealing with the room count and the corners and the nuances of the building as it turns. The building now will have 293 rooms and suites. I think originally we were zoned for closer to 280, 81 maybe. The apartment building is also a little bigger. I think in Eric Heltzer's original calculations, the high-end apartments, luxury apartments were 150 minimum, and we're at 181. And the senior living beds were 120, and I believe, or senior living units, and are now at 127. The 2 buildings of student housing that have started, we originally thought they were close to 800 beds. They're actually turning out to be 792. But the result of those numbers and the income tax dollars put on each bed or each unit or each hotel room has increased our taxes that will be coming to the city and to the state. So that is really what we have to present today. I think we have some pictures. I don't know how to get those in front of you. Jason Hockstock, I think, or you have.
Yeah, Peter, if you can share my screen or allow me to share my screen, I can get
hold
those
on
up for you.
just a second.
This kind of.
Jason, you have the power now.
Okay.
So.
Do you want to review this, Frank?
Well, this is the chart really of what I've gone over with you. So we have increased now the amount of the development of the project by or have 5.3 million of income extra than we had previously as a result of the changes. So that is a positive. And the other changes I mentioned are shown on that space. So we haven't lost any parking places with this. I'll explain one thing that shows us a little less retail, but that's not accurate. So we have designated as part of that retail our own clubhouse and model they're not really income producing as separate. They're income producing as part of the other pieces. So that's not really any kind of a decrease. It's just a decrease in square footage that is designated in a certain way. We have 12 more hotel keys of the Marriott, and we have one more hotel key of the Hyatt House. 7 more units of senior living and memory care. So really there's been no changes other than the elimination of the parking structure and the student housing phase 2. Want to go to the pictures, Jace?
Sure. The site plan.
So if you remember the old site plan, and this is all on your screens, can you all, I gotta put my glasses on. Can you see the H in the middle there, the parking in the middle? So the upper part of that H was where the second phase of the student housing was going to go, and that was going to sit on a podium or a integrated parking structure. Now it's just parking. The 2 pieces in front of that are the hotels. All the way to the left on the top of your screen, the A is the luxury apartments. Below those, the B is the senior living facility. All the parking for those are in between them. And the 2 U-shaped buildings that you see kind of facing each other are the student housing buildings. Actually, the lower building of that one, the lower building, is going up. I think when we got stopped, it had its 3rd floor put up on all of it or most of it. All of these buildings are 5 floors high, which you will see shortly from the pictures. So any question on the site plan at all?
So does anyone have a question on the site plan? Why don't we, Mr. Cass, it'd probably be better to wait till we're completely done and then go back,
Okay.
just because I can't see everybody.
Okay, good. All right. So that's the main entrance, which is Red Cedar Boulevard. Sitting at the back of that entrance, we'll be looking over the park, will be a freestanding restaurant with great views and outdoor seating looking over the park. That has not changed. None of that portion has changed. The only thing you'll see there is where it says Red Cedar on the right of the Marriott Hotel. That hotel now sits on fill instead of a parking structure. This would be the view from Michigan Avenue heading west. The first building you see to the left would be the student housing building. The building next to that would be the full service Marriott AC, and then kind of the grayer building fading there would be the Hyatt House Hotel, and the farthest building away there is the apartments. What's unbelievable about this is all these buildings will make a whole new Michigan Avenue for, you know, a 1/3 of a mile right there. It's pretty dramatic. This will be looking at everything now from the south with a little tilt to the west, you know, that little kind of from Clippert maybe heading that way from the baseball field. You're seeing the back of the hotels, the 2 hotels. You're seeing the 2 apartment buildings from the back. You're seeing a little bit on the right of the Drain Commissioner's lake that he promises will have fishing. To the left then would be the, facing you would be the senior living facility. And above the senior living facility are the apartments. This would be looking at it from the west and the north a little bit. This will be from Clippert. You're looking at the apartments, and behind the apartments, you're looking at the senior living from that particular angle. This part of this has not been colored in. Those materials are not gray and white. Again, this will be looking at it from the south, looking north, but this will be from the southeast. This would be a view of the 2 hotels, the hotel on the right being the Hyatt House, the hotel on the left being the Marriott AC. These are close-ups of the two hotel buildings. There is a recessed connector to those buildings for operational purposes only. The two buildings are separate towers on their own foundation. This will be looking at the two buildings, the hotels. So this will be looking at the Marriott AC from the east, from campus, looking at it from the east. And this will be looking at the Hyatt building from the west. This is really kind of cool. This is the drop-off area. So you're looking from the south into the drop-off area of the two hotels. They obviously will have separate reception areas, reservation areas as well. They're two different brands, but will be run by the same hotel operator, Concord Hospitality. They're one of the two or three most highly accomplished select service hotel operators in the United States. They're in Raleigh, North Carolina. This would be the same two hotels viewed from, I guess, that high-rise student housing project across the way. That's the view they would get of it. Kind of the same thing. I don't know what else we have there. This is a close-up of the drop-off area.
And that's it, Frank.
Yep. So that's the visual presentation. I don't believe that there's much to choose from those visuals to what we had earlier. We've distinguished the two hotels a little more separately. They're different brands, and that was at the request of the brands themselves as well, and of the city. And we think we've complied with everything. So you understand now with this new, the no longer having the integrated parking structure and putting the H at the bottom, H is parking. The parking lot between those lakes there is where the preponderance of the bad soil has been put underneath the parking lots.
Okay, we are now to council member questions. So I'm gonna, I see council member Hussein and Betts, and council member Hussein, let me make sure you're unmuted. Go ahead, council member Hussein.
This is actually a question for Mr. Dorshimer so that we can have the full picture before we start to take questions and consider input. Could you talk to us a little bit about why there was no change necessitated in terms of the brownfield, in terms of capture period, eligible activities, things of that nature?
Carl, let me unmute you. There you are. Wait, hold on. There you go.
Yes, Councilmember Hussein, a good question. The reason why the brownfield plan itself does not need to be amended is because with these changes, we are still, the brownfield expenses, the costs, the brownfield eligible activities to be reimbursed don't exceed the maximums that were approved in the plan. So we're really just changing among line items. And that's what the Brownfield Authority is going to approve. They're going to consider that on the 22nd of this month. And so with that change, we do not need to amend the Brownfield plan.
Hey, thank you. Is that all, Councilmember Hussein? Okay, very good. I saw Councilmember Betts with his hand up. Councilmember Betts.
Thank you, Frank Cass, for being here. Obviously, it's probably nice to be telecommuting to this as opposed to coming into town. So thank you for being able to do that, and thank you everybody for being here. Sorry, I have not been on council very long. I am getting caught up on this project, and I have a few questions to ask. So please, if you can help me get along with this, we can discuss some things afterwards as well if you'd like. The first question I've got, you sold us this project, calling it a transformational plan with the integrated parking structure that needed a brownfield. Now you're basically a developer building a couple hotels, a huge parking lot, and an assisted living facility in the flood zone. So I know that we're giving you a brownfield and we don't need to approve that, but we could outright just reject this entirely and say, well, you don't get a brownfield, you don't get the project at all. So how is this still transformational? What is this giving us that is different than, you know, it being green space or having another developer develop this, as opposed to you who have been working on this for 7 years and have been giving us so many changes over and over? I mean, this is Amendment 11. How many more amendments do we have? So I'll let you answer that first.
Well, first of all, understanding that the project was not a buildable project without a form of subsidy because of the pollution on the land and because of the elevation of the land and its floodplain nature. So irrespective of what was built on it, it could not have been developed. And the piece of land, the golf course closed, I think, in 2005 before I was involved with the project. But I'm told it was a golf course for decades before that, and owned by the city and bringing in zero revenue and zero tax dollars. So one of the things about the business we're in, Councilman, is that you can't build office buildings without office tenants, and office tenants don't grow on trees, and it takes a long time to get them. And take a look at how many new tenanted office buildings might have been built in your marketplace. Retail shopping centers since 2008 are hardly ever built anymore because of the internet and because of the closing of large stores all over the country. So the products today that in fact are being built have some foundation in housing people. So we are a multifaceted developer, one of the few in the country that actually does senior living, market rate apartments, student housing, and hotels, all products that pay heavy taxes, that attract a lot of businesses to come into them on the ground floor of the retail, create employment. For instance, the senior living center will have a payroll probably $2.5 million. The hotel will be exceeding that. So we're bringing in income tax dollars. We bring in real estate tax dollars. Aside from the real estate tax dollars that over the years will pay for this bond, there'll be an additional approximately, I think, $14 million inuring to the city and the state in other forms of school taxes coming out of the real estate tax components. And none of these figures really have, really accounted for the kind of inflation that is likely to happen once this recession is over. So one of the reasons for so many amendments and looking at this thing in so many different ways is the market has been changing. The piece of land has been changing. The more we found out about it in terms of the condition of it and what we could not do. And so that is part of the reason this becomes transformational. Another part of the reason is that we will be the biggest assessee of the drain commissioner's drain fix. And your city for many years has been under a federal mandate to fix the pollution going into the Red Cedar, which goes into the Grand, because you have sanitary running into storm. And this piece of land, because of its elevation and floodway status, is the perfect piece of land to gather all of that and make it a park. So, and we will be, our $260 million development will in fact be the largest taxpayer towards the assessment of that drain as well. So there's many, many reasons that this becomes transformational, none the least of which is our piece of this is 35 acres, the site is 55 acres, and you don't really have another large piece of land between Michigan State University and the state capitol. And so to begin getting Michigan Avenue, the most important thoroughfare in the city, connectivity-wise, this becomes the largest piece of land and a very important piece to get started on making Michigan Avenue what you'd like it to be. So, the product type happens to be a product type that works in any marketplace. So this could be zoned, it could be filled, and you could be sitting there waiting years and years to put retailers on it, or years and years to find an office user to put on it. So I hope that explains why we feel it's transformational, and others have too. And all I can do about 11 amendments, you know, is apologize for what it's taken to get to this point. This has been very difficult for us. We were sued during the process twice, you know, won both times. And there's been nothing about this, sir, that has been easy on us. And therefore, it hadn't always been easy on council, for which I apologize.
Yeah, not easy on council at all, obviously. We had a change in leadership over this project. You know, I've got another question for you. Speaking to the economic impact of this, because obviously I worked on the economic impact study while I was at Anderson, and we made assumptions on income taxes and jobs created during the previous project that included the new student housing that is now reduced and the integrated parking structure for job creation. Now, at that time, we figured that there's going to be about 60 part-time jobs that'll be created, and those might or might not pay a living wage. I mean, they're hotels and an assisted living facility, so that's a question. Are you claiming that those same tax provisions and all of that from the old economic impact study are still the case, or are you planning on producing another impact study to present to us so that we can know how many jobs this will be created?
No, there's really no change to the economic impact study. I think that
even without the integrated parking structure and the student housing, where there were going to be people living and paying income taxes in that student housing that now no longer are going to live there. So you're claiming that that is not going to have a change on our income tax collections. I'm confused by that, because according to me, I think that there is going to be a change.
You do. Well, let's start with this. When we save $12 million of today's buildings, we have $12 million less to cover in real estate taxes during the life of the bond. Those payments make 12 million look like 20 million over that 30-year period. So there's actually a reasonably large savings in money going out to pay the bond over that period of time. So that's number one. From a real estate tax standpoint, we have less infrastructure because the IPS has been removed. Saves 12, which payments of interest over the 30 years comes to 20. That's number one. Secondly, I don't know anything about the 300 second phase student housing beds if those are students, pay income tax in your city. Okay.
They would pay 50% if they were working in East Lansing, assuming that they are working, obviously.
This is in Lansing, though.
The 12 million and the $3 million isn't the question I'm really asking. It's more about the income taxes that we're going to lose, because we no longer have construction workers and we no longer have those students who might or might not be working. That's a question we can ask. And a question I believe that we answered in the economic impact study. There was an estimate for how many students would be working. I helped with that estimate. So I'm wondering if that's okay.
And I would say to you that the students living in the second phase of student housing, 300 beds, would be living in 4-bedroom apartments, 4-bedroom. So there'd be, I think, like 75 apartments that would have been there just for students. And the amount of those students working there, first of all, it wouldn't have taken one more employee on the part of the manager of the student housing project to manage that along with the other 792 beds. So there wouldn't be any more leasing people. There wouldn't be, there maybe is one more property management person. In terms of students working there, okay, that is not really a big issue. Let me give you a big number, okay? In the state of Michigan, hotel taxes are 16%. These hotels, which by the way was never really included properly in your study. I don't know if you had anything to do with that or not, okay? But 16%.
I believe that the study did include hotel taxes.
It wasn't correct. It wasn't correct. So the hotel tax is 16%. 6% goes to the state, 10% is city, county, and convention center or visitors bureau. The hotel with 293 rooms at stabilization year 3 should do $10 million in room revenue. And that in itself would be $1.6 million a year coming in economic benefits to your city, county, convention bureau, and state. The full-time employment on the site will be close to $7 million full-time employment. And again, that 1% that comes to the city of Lansing for that, again, is a significant number, way more significant than losing 300 students that would be living there.
Okay, I guess we're
Councilmember
jumping.
Betts, Councilmember Betts and Mr. Cass, I appreciate answer, question, answer. Let's not do too much of a crosstalk. It's getting a little distracting on the call.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think that we're jumping around on that question. I've got a couple more that I'd like to ask, so then we can just get this over with. You know, this is a quote from the MEDC, who did not approve your project in its previous or current reduced scope. I'd like you to elaborate on this. They said, after a long and careful review, we have determined this project in its current scope does not meet our core strategic priorities, such as greater access to affordable or low-income housing, revitalizing or stimulating development in core downtown areas, or the creation of a long-term net economic benefit for the limited state economic development resources available. And that was an MED spokesman. So the MEDC didn't give you a brownfield. They don't see this as transformational. They don't see this as having an economic benefit, but you claim, so you're claiming they're wrong. I just want to make sure that I understand your point of view on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Betts. Mr. Cass, thank you.
You would like me to answer that, I presume?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead. I just wanted to.
I think Carl can answer that as well. But yes, I do think they were completely wrong. You know, they said that their emphasis should be downtown, when in fact their newly coined emphasis was downtown and major corridors, and Michigan Avenue certainly was a major corridor. The other thing that somehow your study and the MEDC didn't really take into consideration is during construction, we have $115 million worth of payroll, payroll in Lansing, that will be taxed in Lansing and the state. I'd never understood how they didn't count that. That's 4.25%. That was about $4.8 million during a 2.5-year construction period coming into the state coffers that I think is a huge economic benefit. I already mentioned the 6% the state takes on the hotels coming in is $600,000 a year, $18 million to the state over that period of time. None of those things were mentioned in the MEDC report. So all I know is we are working with the MEDC again. I am told that the MEDC is thrilled about the fact we've removed the integrated parking structure, and we feel very positive about getting their approval shortly. So, you know, we don't quit very easily, and we think that the work that was done by them was not really complete. One of the things they cited in our work was that the study done by Anderson was strictly focused on local, the city, and not on the region and the state, which we pointed out to them, the hotels and the other form of payroll to the state at the time of construction. So we feel we're going to be okay with the MEDC. I guess time will tell, but we have, again, meetings with them on Thursday. I hope that answers it.
So before we move on, Mr. Cass indicated that maybe Carl would like to elaborate on that before we move on. Or you don't have to, certainly, Mr. Dorschmer, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate.
Yeah, just briefly. So a draft work plan, a new draft work plan that addresses a lot of the issues that MEDC had with the previous plan has been submitted. And so, and as Mr. Cass indicated, the MEDC is reviewing that right now. We have a meeting to meet with them and the developer this Thursday, and we're optimistic that we can work through these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Dorschmer. Councilmember Betts.
Thank you very much. And I think that just to clarify, so the public understands how an economic impact study works, it looks at net new effects. So it looks at specifically what is new on top of what would have already happened. So these construction jobs, some of them would have probably already happened. People would have probably already been hired, at least some proportion of them. So that's how these estimates come out. Now, I have one last question for you, Mr. Cass. This is kind of a personal thing to me, especially coming from the East Side and seeing how you spoke about the East Side while you were speaking about this project in the news media. And I'm going to read some quotes, and I'm going to ask you to elaborate about how you're feeling about this project. And, just questioning you as a developer and whether or not you're the right developer for this. And so I'm going to read this, and I would like you to elaborate. So from the city polls, cast that a project like this in Ohio would have been welcomed with a sizable tax abatement with the larger financial benefits for his company that are simply unavailable in Michigan. Still, the project's close proximity to MSU and East Lansing makes it worth his time to pursue construction in a, quote, podunk city like Lansing, he explained. Merriam-Webster defines podunk as a small, unimportant, isolated town. Cass, in a recorded interview with City Pulse, later tried to put his podunk comment off the record. City Pulse declined, but did allow his subsequent clarification, which good job on your PR department, of course. He emphasized that he simply meant Lansing was a smaller city with less financial tools than other metropolitans. That aside, you think this is a podunk city, that's fine. Why do we need you here? Why don't we have a developer that actually likes the city? I can think of 1,000 of them that like to be here, want to build here. Why are we approving your project today as opposed to a project from some other developer who, honestly, when you said that the integrated parking structure was transformational, I believed you. I believe that this was important. I believe that we needed to raise everything above the floodplain so you can have things there, and you were the only company who could get this done. How are you the only company that can get this done now?
We're not the only company that can get it done. We're the only company that's doing it. We've already spent $20 million. So if you would like to stop this project, which kind of conversation you're having today with this, you would be creating a real problem, not just for us, the developer, but for the entire city. Because we have actually spent $20 million moving dirt around, starting the buildings, and getting this whole project going. We have franchises with hotels that we've paid for the franchises with a Hyatt House and with Marriott. So the thought for a minute, now I will tell you, I apologize for my remarks, but I will tell you, you had a reporter that was hounding me a long time ago, and literally he's still calling me to this day to try to get comments from me, and I lost my temper. Simple as that. For those people on your city council and the people within the city that I've worked with for the last 5, 6, 7 years know about who I am, the integrity of our company, and the kind of work we do. I'm not telling you we're the only company that could do this. I'm telling you we're the only company that is doing this, and nobody else really wanted this except one guy way over his head that sued us both in Cook County, and in Ingham County. And so I can't tell you any more than that. We are developing this project. That is us. There is nobody else. There aren't any other uses. We've lined up the best operator in the Midwest for senior living, the very, very best. Leo Brown out of Indianapolis, Traditions they're called. We have the best hotel operator for select service hotels in the country. We have one of the largest and best operators of student housing and apartments in the country in terms of the quality of the operations that they run. We're partners with those people. We have been partners with these companies for years with successful projects in several states. We're right now doing this in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Kentucky, and so we know what we are doing, and we are the right people to do this. But more importantly, we are doing it. We're there now. And if you think it's smart to stop this project today, you would be making a very, very big mistake.
Thank you, Frank. I really appreciate you answering my questions today. I hope that I am a smart person, and obviously I think I am. So we'll see how this goes. I really appreciate it. Peter, Mr. President, I apologize. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask those questions.
No problem. So are there other questions for the team assembled? Councilmember Wood.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to clear up a couple of things. First of all, to the city attorney, because this is the 11th amendment to the development agreement, it's my understanding by the information that we had received from our office manager that some of the other changes to the development agreement were minor changes that were put in place and not a total rewrite to the development agreement. Am I correct on that?
Well, am I on? I guess I'm on. And Peter, Mr. Chair, you might want to add Greg also to this because he's been drafting this for 5 years now or 4 years.
Let me find him here. Hold on just a second.
But let me give you an overview. So 2 of the amendments basically were extensions of time. There was a clause in the agreement that allowed the city attorney to, and it's been in other development agreements, to make the decision as to whether the changes in any particular document are material enough to come back to council. So in dealing with 8 and 9, those were extensions of time, not material, didn't affect anything that we could tell. 10 actually was an enhancement. There were a lot of technical changes in 10, but there was an enhancement in 10 in that we had the guarantee of the corporation and the LLC for performance, and that was switched to personal guarantees of the developers. It was an enhancement to the position, the performance, not a derogation of it. There were a lot of other technical changes. This has been a project that's been going through LBRA Tax Council, LBRA Bond Council, and so a lot of changes had to be made to help with the sale of those bonds and the IRS, tax exempt versus non-tax. And so in view of what we saw here, I did not, in my judgment, I did not believe that that 10th Amendment was a substantial. However, 11, yes, this is substantial because it changes what you all believe was going to be built in terms of student housing and the scope of the project. So in this case, we say yes. And Greg, you've been drafting this back and forth. Maybe you could give some of the battle stories here.
Sure. I mean, I can recap all 11 amendments, and I should say that the 11 amendments, or including the proposed 11th amendment that's in front of council now, these are going back to just, I think it was originally February of 2018, and we've been dealing with that. That itself is the amended restated of a much earlier development agreement that had been amended about 10 times itself. Since that time, the First Amendment was substantive. That actually came to council prior to council approving the amended restated. That happened. And then the second through sixth amendments were all just date extensions of various deadlines while things were being figured out between the parties. The Seventh Amendment was rather substantive. That was the one that you all approved, I think, in April of 19. And it was February or April of 19, but it shifted all of the bonding obligations from full faith and credit of the city to no full faith and credit of the city. The bonding was going to be done through LBRA and basically on the backs of the tax capture alone. And then after 7, 8, 9 were date extensions. 10 is the one that Jim very correctly and succinctly summarized. A lot of that was technical and done in concert with our tax council and our bonding council in order to essentially make those bonds that our LBRA is going to issue as, trying to get the money as cheap as possible so that it is the lowest burden in terms of debt service to be repaid by the tax increment. And then I'll just say the 11th Amendment that's actually before you is, in terms of substantive amendments, the simplest and most boring substantive amendment. It essentially acknowledges that the IPS is no longer being built, so it pulls that out, and it acknowledges that the second phase of student housing was a second structure. It wasn't actually even listed as a second structure. It was just the number of beds is being reduced by that roughly 300 number. And then other than that, it's just pulling out references to the IPS throughout the rest of the document. So that's the summary of amendments to date.
Thank you, Mr. Venker.
All right, thank you. I have a couple other questions, Mr. President, if that's all right.
It is, and then we're going to go to Councilmember Spitzy. I see you, Patricia.
Okay. My next question, or clarification on this is we are not voting on the brownfield because that has already been passed by council. And the fact that if there is a reduction in what they need from the brownfield because they're reducing the site, it is a repayment based only on what they utilize in the brownfield. Am I correct on that? And I see a thumbs up.
Carl is giving a thumbs up on that. So is
Carl
Mr. Vinker.
Dershmer. Okay. So the only work before council is looking at an amended development agreement, which is pulling out the second phase, the student housing and the underground parking. So that's what we're looking at. The development agreement that included labor, using local labor, and all of those things are still part of this development agreement. Is that correct? And
Absolutely.
I see people shaking their heads on that. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that I totally understood and that the public understood where we are on this right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wood. Councilmember Spitzley. Not yet. Hold on. There you go.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councilmember Wood, because that was a concern that I had as well. As the last amendment I remember was amendment number 7, and so having amendment 11 to the development agreement brought to us today kind of raised some concerns. I called Jim this morning or this afternoon about some of the changes in Amendment 10, and so I'm glad that that was brought up. As for the student housing, did I hear correctly that it's not going to be phase 1? It's not going to be totally pulled out of the project, that it's going to be 3 years down the road. Is that what I heard?
No, I think you heard, and someone else can step in, but I think you heard that the phase 2 of the student housing will not be done. They're only doing the phase 1 of the student housing under this development agreement. Am I wrong? Anyone want to tell me I'm wrong?
That's correct.
That's a wise decision, Mr. Vinker.
So phase 2 is not going to be, so where the parking is almost by the lake, H, that was going to be phase 2 of the student parking, student housing, and now there's not going to be any student housing there at all?
I actually can answer this unless somebody wants to jump in, only because I've stared at this for so long. There was going to be another student housing building on top of the IPS, which is now surface parking directly south of the hotels. That was going to be the IPS structure, which was going to have a raised elevation parking beneath it, and on top of it was going to be one of the student housing buildings, and that is the structure that's being eliminated from the project, if that makes sense.
And my understanding too, Greg, is that the student housing in phase 1 is already being constructed.
Correct.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember Spitzley?
I guess I misunderstood. I guess I misunderstood. I thought I heard that there was going to be another, there could potentially be another phase in 2 or 3 years. So thank you. Yep.
The 3-year reference was in constructing the IPS, they're going to have to carry the debt service on that for 2 or 3 years before something profitable would be put on it that could pay taxes to pay it back. Because that student housing was going to be, that second student housing building was going to be one of the last things that got constructed on the whole property. And so the IPS was essentially going to be a dead weight on their debt service for that amount of time. Okay. If that makes sense.
Yep.
Before we move on, Councilmember Spitzley, are you all set? Thumbs up if you are. Good, okay. I saw Councilmember Betts and Wood, I believe. Is that accurate? Councilmember Betts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jim or Greg, you might have an answer for this. If we vote no on this particular amendment, does that mean that we revert back to the 10th Amendment, or does that mean the project is dead? How does this vote work?
Goes back to 10th Amendment.
Okay.
Didn't approve the 11th, so whether, that's basically it.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Wood, and then I have a question.
I would like to ask the mayor. I know this has been moved forward by the mayor's office. I would like him to weigh in on this amendment change and his feelings on this at this point.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'm comfortable with this. It reduces the cost, which I think is a good thing. It addresses a lot of the MEDC concerns, which I think is a good thing. I was not one of the fans of the student housing either, although it was an acceptable part of the project, and it reduces that. So, this, to me, this continues with the things that were really attractive about this for our community. As we look at capital to campus, having the hotels, having the market rate housing, the senior assisted living, the restaurants, the parks and things like that, having a big taxpayer to be paying off a good chunk of the drain assessment that we're going to be facing. These are all good things. So if you look at what was already presented and approved by council, this takes out some things that I think I'm okay with. So I look forward to this passing and the MEDC agreeing and the work continuing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Wood, do you have any further questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have one question. I don't know who can answer this, but maybe Carl or Mr. Cass. Without the IPS on the site that was formerly known as student housing, is that area developable in the future? I know you said you got in there and realized there was a little bit of change in the what you understood to be the buildability of that land. Does that mean that in a few years someone could come and develop that parking lot into something, or will it require that foundation work as was predicted for the student housing? Mr. Cass, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so that's a really good question to understand it. And I think one of the questions earlier that one of the council ladies asked, the parking lot that we're referring to where that IPS was, the parking lot's exactly where it was before. It just doesn't have the platform on top of it that would have held the second student housing building. That platform costs $15 million. The parking's still below, and there'll be really two very cool elevators on the east and the west that still take people that park there up to the hotels and the restaurants and so forth. Okay, it'd be very cool. Your question is very good, because down the road, if we get an office user, like LEAP had us make a presentation to an office user that was out looking at 3-4 sites within your region. We were the one they were looking at in Lansing, but they had sites in East Lansing and Okemos they looked at as well. We made a presentation to them. We could down the road build a podium just for a new building that would be just the size of a 20,000 foot footprint for an office building that would become a $3 million IPS just for that office building, and add revenue to the site to pay for that as well. But so I hope that answers it. It still is a buildable site, but to ever build on it, it would have to have a smaller podium put on it. And but the hotel site, by the way, the hotels sit at the exact same height that they would have sat had there been a podium or an IPS there. That's a site 7 feet above the road that has to be maintained to keep the buildings out of floodplain. Okay, so I hope that answers it. So yes, it's still a site that could be built down the road, but we're not paying a $15 million infrastructure for something we don't need because we don't know that we need it.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. That does answer my question.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions from council. So speak now, forever hold your peace. Thank you, Frank, Jason, Carl, and Eric for your willingness to be here this evening. Council, this is being introduced formally this evening, and we're referring it to the committee of the whole, and we'll discuss it next week. The plan is to move it out on the 27th unless there's strong objection, then we'll move it on the 4th. But that's the plan as of now. So just make sure we get do our homework on that one. it will be introduced this evening. Thank you all. I'm going to turn off the videos of the non-essentials, and thank you for being here today.
And with that, we are to the order of comments by council members and the city clerk.
Council members, I see Council Member Betts' hand is up. Council Member Betts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to draw attention. There's a new tenants union that has been created in Lansing. Their goal is to help people through the crisis right now, and then to further push some policies and stuff like that towards tenants' rights in the future. You can find them on Facebook at Lansing Tenants, or you can shoot them an email at lansingtenants@gmail.com, and they'd be happy to answer any questions. And if you'd like to join the union, if you are a tenant, that would be a great thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Betts. Are there other folks that have announcements? Seeing no council members, the clerk, oh, I'm sorry, Vice President Hussein.
Actually, President Spatafor, I have a question, and if the mayor could potentially discuss this in his remarks, I'd appreciate it. We do know that Governor Whitmer's new stay-in-place executive order clarified yard waste as essential services. And so I'm curious, we know that in turn some adjacent municipalities have kind of set the wheels in motion so they can begin collection next week. My question to you is, are we evolving in terms of our position? Are we still looking at 2 weeks from the lifting of the shelter in place? I'm just getting a lot of questions on this piece. So if you could provide some clarification, I'd appreciate it. And then the second thing that I have for the mayor tonight is that there is a protest planned for this Wednesday. It's the subject shelter in place order. And I think there's some question about legality and whether or not this is a legal assembly. And then secondly, do we have a plan in place to try to make sure that we mitigate any exposure risk to our folks here in the city of Lansing? Thanks.
So we'll get to that under mayor's remarks, if that's all right with the mayor. Any other council members? All right, seeing none, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, President Spatafor. I do just want to make sure that the public who's watching is aware that there is no city election in May. We continue to have members of the public requesting an absentee ballot for an election that we don't have. So our next election is the primary in August. And we are working on ways to make sure and hold that election safely, assuming that there will be some trail of this health emergency right now. We are working on how to best mitigate that.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
And with that, we are to community event announcements. There's members of the public who have a community event. We give 1 minute for very brief announcements of events. So you would need to raise your hand.
Yes, you know how to do that. So if you're on a Mac, do your option Y. A Windows computer is Alt Y, and if you're participating on the phone, *9. So we'll give you about 10 seconds to figure that one out, and then we'll move on. Mr. Clerk.
All right, seeing no one. We do generally in an in-person meeting, the council rules require speakers to sign in for public comment. Our first public comment period is coming up after the mayor's comments. And that does only include the legislative matters that the council will be acting on tonight that are listed on the agenda. So with the Zoom, we will be using the same as the President Spatafor just announced. You will need to raise your hand. I think we can go ahead and have people start raising their hand during the mayor's comments. And then when the mayor has completed his comments, we will allow the members of the public to comment. The rules allow up to 3 minutes for public comment on agenda items.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
I think Councilwoman Spitzley had her hand up. I don't know if you want to go to her first.
Are you trying to participate in public comment, Councilmember Spitzley, or do you have a question?
I'm sorry. When the mayor makes his comments, I know I think we're having a food bank come up, and I think you're going to mention that. Can you talk about how that's going to work? I know we mentioned it the last time, but if you could just mention it again, how I think it's drive through, and really appreciate it.
So I can take those in order. I think Councilwoman Spitzley's talking about the mobile food pantry, and that will be happening again. Sorry, I gotta remember the location is Lansing Catholic. It's at Lansing Catholic. It is a drive up for those who have cars and can drive up. They drive up one by one. They get handed the food that they would be getting. Anybody who walks up, we will serve those who walk up also socially separated, and we still do some delivery to seniors and others who can't get there. But that will be happening this Saturday at Lansing Catholic as long as this food is available. It's the same, really, it's the same conditions as any other mobile food pantry, but socially separated. We're not going to have the everybody in the gym sitting there listening and waiting. There will be drive up. So yes, that will be happening this Saturday. I'll answer Councilman Hussein's questions. I'm going to try and remember what they were. The first one was the second one was the protest. The protest is legal under the governor's newest executive order, Executive Order 42 of 2020. People are allowed to in essence protest and do organized protests under their First Amendment rights. It's my understanding that they are planning to circle the Capitol, and they're allowed to do that. Police are not allowed to pull over anybody if they believe that they are violating the executive order. So really our role is we are monitoring that. There was an earlier Facebook post where they said they were going to create gridlock and bring traffic to a standstill. I think the ironic part of that is there's not a lot of traffic downtown right now. So we'll have police there just like we would for any other rally or anything else at the Capitol to ensure the safety of residents or workers or visitors who really shouldn't be visiting, but anybody who's downtown. If there was a blocked street, then our public service would be there to barricade if we needed to. So we will continue to ensure the safety of anyone there, any residents or anyone there, just like any other rally. But with the newest executive order conditions, with the First Amendment rights, and with the Attorney General's dictate that police cannot pull someone over if they suspect they're violating executive order, cars driving around the Capitol and hitting their horns or whatever, we'll be monitoring. There's also possibilities that they're going to neighborhoods and things like that. And if that happens, then we are willing to shut down streets. If people are hitting horns and violating noise ordinances or something like that, then we'll shut down streets if we have to. But right now, if it's just driving around the Capitol and protesting, then we'll have folks there monitoring. Michigan State Police will be there monitoring, and they can exercise their legal rights, and as long as they're not putting anybody at risk or in danger. What was your first question?
The first question dealt with yard waste and the fact that local municipalities, I think such as East Lansing, are starting yard waste pickup next week, because my understanding is yard waste was deemed essential under the newest executive order. So I was wondering if we had changed our position.
Yeah, in the newest in the original executive order, recycling and trash was allowed. In the newest one, they said sanitation and recycling and composting. So we are going to start having that conversation. We've been looking at drop-off sites, and now there are drop-off sites available. We are not. We have to navigate our seasonal employees. I don't know about East Lansing. I just saw a press release from East Lansing that they were laying off all of their seasonals and others. We have not brought on our seasonals yet, so we have to navigate our timing. It was 2 weeks after the stay-home order is done because we have to hire seasonals. So we are going to take a look at all of that. We expect to bring a few on as long as we think that it's legal to pick up yard waste when we can, but I'd like to try and have some drop-off sites if possible. Now that composting is allowed, these businesses are opened up where we would normally bring that yard waste anyway. After we collect it, we're going to see if we can do some drop-off sites until we get yard waste folks on. But the directive right now is we're working on hiring, and it was 2 weeks until after the stay-home order. So we'll, as soon as we can get a date, we will put one out there. But for now, it's, you know, today is the first day that people were really supposed to be putting it out. So we haven't really delayed anything yet. And I know there's a lot of people who have already put their yard waste bags out, and we see that every year. Today is the first day they're allowed. So we're continuing to work on a plan once we saw the new executive order and saw composting included in it. That changed things a bit, but we'll work on bringing on seasonals as now that we're allowed, as our budget allows. Again, with other communities laying off seasonals, we're gonna hire where we can. We do have a hiring freeze, but we are going to bring on people as needed, even with that hiring freeze. So we're working on it all. There's no solid answer yet, as the executive order just came out, and we're going to have those conversations in the next few days.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I don't have much else, Councilman or Council President.
Thank you. Councilmember Hussein, are you all set?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, I don't see any public comment.
I do not see any hands either, so we will move on. We are to the consent agenda.
Yes, and items C, D, and E will be pulled from the consent agenda. So Vice President Hussein.
President Spatafor, we have two items on the consent agenda. Item A is the setting of a public hearing in consideration of annual consolidated strategy and plan submission and action plan, proposed budget for community development block grant fund resources for fiscal year 2021. And we have item B, which is the setting of a public hearing in consideration of fiscal year 2021 city budget for Monday, May 4th, as part of the Lansing City Council's regularly scheduled meeting. With that being said, I'd move the consent agenda.
The consent agenda has been moved. Is there, Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
On adoption of the consent agenda, Councilmember Betts.
Yes.
Councilmember Dunbar. Councilmember Dunbar.
I think she mouthed yes. Hold on. Yes.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
8 yeas, 0 nays, the resolution is adopted. So that takes us to the resolutions for action by the Committee on Development and Planning.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first one we have before us is SLU. No, that's not the first one we have before us. The first one we have before us is SLU 1-2020 Telecommunications Tower. This is for Metro FiberNet, and they've requested a special land use permit to allow a telecommunications tower and related structures at the southeast corner of the property located between 1220 and 1306 North Homer Street. This tower is specifically for like public access channels, PEG channels. It's not cable, AT&T or whatever, but it's just for Metro FiberNet's customers for public access channels, if I'm not mistaken. And the special land use is for the height of the tower. We did have a public hearing on this on March 16th, 2020. It has been reviewed by the Committee of Development and Planning, and based on that review and based on the public comment, I move the resolution.
Okay, the motion has been made to move the resolution for SLU 1-2020. Is there any discussion on this SLU, on the resolution? Councilmember Hussein.
Just very quickly, I'm not a huge fan of this, and I wasn't a huge fan of this when this came before the Development and Planning Committee. I do think, however, a few things should be noted. The first is that the Planning Board did approve this unanimously after they noticed their public hearing out to 1,000 feet, which actually exceeds the statutory requirement. I think what they ended up having at their public hearing was one individual on hand. They were not opposed. We did receive an email, I think just a few days back, which expressed some opposition. That, however, came from a Kalamazoo resident that works for an entity that essentially opposes these types of developments all across the state. I do think also it should be noted that this still has to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance request in terms of the height piece. This has to come back to City Council for the setback piece. So this isn't our only bite at the apple. So with that being said, I will support this, but I did want to express the fact that I wasn't, a huge fan from the outset, but there are, I think, some protections in there.
Thank you, Councilmember Hussein. Any others wishing to make remarks? Seeing Councilmember Wood, I thought you might. There you are. You're unmuted.
Thank you, President Spatafor. If this is going to the Zoning Board of Appeals, it won't come back to us. Zoning Board of Appeals makes a decision, and if there is concern about that decision, then it goes to circuit court. So I just want to clarify that. I did see Councilmember Hussein raise his hand, so maybe there's another portion that I'm not aware of. My concern is when being on council, when we originally passed an ordinance dealing with height restrictions in residential areas and things like that, it was based on the fact that we were concerned about having towers this size in neighborhoods. And so I'm not supportive of this. And unless Councilmember Hussein can give me another reason why this might come back to us, that we would have another chance to vote on it. I think this is going to be our only chance to make a determination on this.
Councilmember Hussein, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so, and this might be a better question for the city attorney, but my understanding is that the height piece is going to the Board of Zoning Appeals, but there are setback pieces that will come back before the city council. The other piece that's spelled out in the resolution is that the zoning administrator actually has the authority to demand additional, whether that be landscaping, whether that be an opaque fence of some sort, to kind of further screen that property on the south. I did actually visit this. I was such a opponent of this when this first came before the Development and Planning Committee. I did actually visit this particular address. It really is an interesting neighborhood. There are single-family homes, there are two-family homes, there are multi-family properties of some 4 to 5 stories. There is, obviously, they have the sound barrier wall right there adjacent to 127. There is an existing, a very small existing utility building on the subject property. But again, because of kind of the positioning and because of the fact that this still has to go before the BZA, I think come back before council, and the fact that the zoning administrator has a little bit of authority to demand kind of above and beyond on this piece, I'll support, but I certainly understand your concern. Jim, do you want to address that?
Oh, Mr. Smirkle, hold on. You're unmuted now. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, generally, so if the SLU is approved, that takes care of that zoning issue. The Zoning Board of Appeals would deal with issues related to anything that's causing undue hardship or practical difficulties is a standard, and it could be setbacks and things of all that type of nature. I'm not familiar with what happened in the lower tribunal on this about the zoning administrator's decisions, but generally, if it's just going back to the ZBA for minor issues on setbacks and distances that are claimed to be practical difficulties or undue hardship, it wouldn't come back. So I'm not sure I'm answering it because I don't have that background information on this particular case.
Jim, I've got you. Okay, Councilmember Spitzley.
It was my understanding that it wouldn't come back as well. That this was the final vote. So
This
that
is
was my understanding as well.
Thank you. This is a vacant parcel of land right now along the freeway. Is that correct? Councilmember Wood, yeah.
It's my understanding that this is Board of Water and Light property that they are putting this on. So there is utility, small utility building that is there on this property.
Yeah, okay, that's what that is. Okay, I couldn't tell from the aerial. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. So is this where the Board Water and Light would get paid for basically renting their land, or would the city get any benefit?
Councilmember Woods shaking her head yes. It seems as if the Board of Water and Light would be paid
The
and the city
board
would
is
not receive.
leasing, the board is leasing the property to Metro FiberNet, so.
Yes.
And I guess
And this, go ahead, Councilmember Jackson, I'm sorry.
just to follow up, so if, I guess the telecommunications company, they can go basically to any parcel owner and try to get them to be on board, and then we still have to go through our vote here and zoning variance, it sounds like. Is that the process?
Yep.
City Attorney says yes, and Councilmember
If it
Woods.
isn't, yeah, if it isn't zoned for this, it's either got to be an SLU or there's going to have to be a rezoning the property. It's one of those two.
So I guess what's the point of supporting it? Just so that we can be more connected in that area? I just missed, obviously I'm not in that thing. I just want to know why should we support it?
Yeah, and this was at council the last time we were together as a council. We had the public hearing and they presented on this as this was a radio tower for their public access, or I'm sorry, their local broadband channels, is that, or their local broadcast channels, is that correct?
That's correct.
This
It's
is not the expansion of their fiber network.
Right, it's for the local, it's to provide local access to the local channels to their customers, yes.
So there'll be more, I guess those customers, it'll be clearer for them in that area because I'm sure they have access. It's not like all of a sudden they'll get access, is it?
I don't understand the technology well enough to answer that question. Yeah. Councilmember Wood, you had your hand up. Councilmember Jackson has finished this, that is.
Just for some clarification, when we passed the ordinance, it allowed the zoning administrator in certain zones to approve administratively the placement of cell towers, and it had to be in industrial zoned locations that they could approve. Anything that was in office or residential had to come before council for approval, just simply because we were having an issue with cell tower people going to individuals who had property and wanting to put up cell towers in neighborhoods. The issue is the height of this cell tower and this particular neighborhood. And I think I asked the gentleman the question whether he was going to be commingling, which was one of the things that we had asked, that if you're putting up a tower of this magnitude, that you are also allowing other entities to be on the tower so that there are fewer towers in the city. And he indicated no, that it was only for their network. So that's another reason why I'm not supportive of this.
Thank you. I recall all that now. Thank you.
Okay. There's a number of questions still. Councilmember Hussein, yes.
Just very quickly, Jim, and I hate to circle back to this time and time again. I just want to make sure I know what I'm voting for. In the last Be It Finally Resolved, it does state, number 9, the proposed special land use requires a height variance by the Board of Zoning Appeals and setback separation distance waivers by the City Council. And I thought that implied that it would come back. So this is essentially our only bite at the apple. This will not come back to us at any time, correct?
Well, except for that last resolution clause, the variances variances are approved by the ZBA, period.
Yeah, exactly.
But
okay.
I just don't know that last sentence you read sounds like
Given
conditioned on the zoning on Sioux Statuette.
Given
well,
the
and
Councilmember Hussein, I'm sorry.
so and that was the reason for the question, because not only is it in the resolution, but I also wrote it down as part of my notes when Susan presented to us in development and planning. So I want to make sure I know, what I'm voting for.
Given the confusion and maybe lack of clarity, it might be a good idea to entertain a motion to table this until our next meeting. It sounds like Councilmember Hussein has made that motion.
Do I need to withdraw my motion, or how does this work?
No, we'll
Okay.
it's my understanding.
Just table it, yeah.
It's been moved to table. Do we need a roll call on that, Mr. Clerk?
It's up to you.
Go ahead and call the roll, please.
Councilmember Betts.
No.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Yes.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
No.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
No.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
5 yeas, 3 nays. The motion to table is adopted.
Thank you. We'll look to get some clarity on those answers and bring this back to the meeting for the 27th. Next item, Councilmember Spitzley, SLU 3-2019.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I just messed myself. Wait a minute. Here I go. There I am. All right. Thank you, Mr. President. What we have before us is SLU 3-2019. It is special land use permit that allows the construction of a parking lot on the property at 1315 Massachusetts Avenue. This special land use permit is to accommodate the staffing at the school / daycare across the street. They have went around to the neighborhood, and it's my understanding that the neighbors are generally in support of it. This lot here will also, how they're going to address some of the concerns is there's going to be a setback with the lot adjacent to it, so that there is a buffer zone between the adjacent house and also the parking lot. It was the planning board met at January 7th, 2020, and recommended approval of the special land use permit. The city council also held a public hearing regarding the special land use permit on March 16th, 2020. And the Committee on Development and Planning has also reviewed this, had folks come in and provide testimony, and based on the public hearing, the review on development and planning, the planning board's recommended approval, I will move the resolution to allow land use permit, the special land use designation for 1315 Massachusetts Avenue.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councilmember Spitzley. Is there any further discussion on this subject? Councilmember Betts, is that a hand?
Yes, that is a hand. I just wanted to acknowledge that the person to the north wrote a letter to council opposing this, saying that they did not want it there. However, we are building, and their worry was that there was going to be lights from cars facing their house at night. However, there will be a privacy fence, and there will be a substantial number of trees planted, I believe, that should block most of that view. Plus, they're getting 8 feet, I believe 6 or 8 feet, Pat, you might have to give me the exact number on that, of extra space so that they can plant whatever they want or do whatever they want with that piece of property. So just wanted to let everybody know that that was kind of something that was going on with this as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this? All right, hearing none, Mr. Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
Adoption of the resolution, Councilmember Betts.
Yes.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Yes.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
8 yeas, 0 nays. The resolution is adopted.
Thank you very much. The next item is a supplemental appropriation and grant acceptance. Councilmember Hussein.
Sure. Thanks for the lead in. Specifically, President Spatafor, this resolution would approve the receipt and appropriation of $608,455 from additional allocated U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Emergency Solution Grants as authorized by the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, better known as the Federal CARES Act. This would be to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic among individuals and families who are homeless or receiving homeless assistance, in addition to supporting additional homeless assistance and homelessness prevention activities to mitigate the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to that, the support of this resolution would also approve the receipt and appropriation of $1,203,250 from additional HUD Community Development Block grants as authorized by the Federal CARES Act for CDBG eligible activities. That being said, I would move the resolution.
And just thank you, Councilmember Hussein. Before we begin discussion, I do want to point out this is the first time we are seeing this as a council, but given the nature of these dollars, we did decide it was important to try and move this along as quickly as possible to get those dollars where they're most needed in our community. So it's the council's prerogative to do with this what we will, but it is our recommendation from leadership to move this along and get the appropriation flowing. So with that, I'll open it up to discussion. Councilmember Wood.
Thank you, President Spatafor. And I'm not sure who is still here that might be able to answer the question, but is there a timeline on when this has to be spent by? I know that HUD dollars sometimes carry forward into additional years, but is because it has to do mainly in part of the coronavirus dollars, is it this fiscal year, or can this move into the next fiscal year as well?
Mr. Mayor.
So, Councilwoman, I don't know that answer specifically on how long we have to spend it. I don't know that we really talked about that because we're planning to spend it pretty quickly. The ESG dollars are mostly homeless related, and that plan is being worked on right now by Kim Coleman, our director of HRCS, along with our shelters. So it's going to be spent pretty quickly. I will check, or I'll have our folks check to see, if it takes. My understanding is it's spent in relation to the emergency, so it doesn't matter the fiscal year, and it actually counts towards current year, so we don't have to wait until next fiscal year. But I believe we have as long as we need with the emergency. But I think you're asking if we have to spend it by July 1st, and the answer is I don't believe so, but I don't want to say that 100%. I'll let you know, but we do expect to have the plan for both of these in place. We're also looking at the CDBG dollars, which have more flexibility than traditional CDBG. So we're looking to see where we can put those dollars. We just announced a small business rescue program, and we'd like to put some of these dollars into that, as well as other community development. And if we do, it would be within CDBG areas or for low mod owners, and along the lines of the requirements. So I'll check and see if there's anything that Don or Brian or Barb have heard about having to spend this by July 1st, because I know it is current year, but I believe it's just in relation to the emergency. So I'm gonna say that with the caveat that I'm not 100% sure, and if that's wrong, then I will email council and let you know.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Let's see here. No other hands up. The motion has been made to move the resolution. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Betts.
Yep.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Yep.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood. 8 yeas, 0 nays, the resolution is adopted.
Thank you very much. Let me see here.
Okay, that was our final resolution. So we are to speaker registration for public comment on city government related.
Before we move on, Councilmember Spitzley has her hand up. Councilmember Spitzley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Regarding the discussion on the SLU for the Metro FiberNet tower, I just received an email from Sherry Boak, and I think it was sent to Vice President Hussein as well, kind of given the explanation regarding that last sentence and noting that the height restriction, the setback requirements, so the part of the SLU that the council will be reviewing and granting a variance, will be granting that variance by default. That was kind of the intent. And so with that information provided, I'm wondering if we would like to do a reconsideration and actually move it this evening.
If you're making the motion, we can
I'm
take
making the motion.
The motion is to reconsider the vote by which SLU 1-2020 was passed. Councilmember Wood.
You need to untable it first
Right.
before you do the
Okay. I'm okay.
Thank you.
So is that, it wasn't my motion, so do I make the motion then to untable?
It sounds like you have. So the motion before us is to untable SLU 1-2020. Would the clerk please call the roll? Or is there discussion, I suppose? Let's just get to the vote. Councilmember Jackson.
I'm sorry, what was that new information?
So I'm looking at some of our the minutes from development and planning. So we did talk about the setbacks, and we talked about the height restrictions. And at that time, Ms. Statuick noted that there is a height restriction and setback requirements as part of the SLU. So as part of the SLU, the council will be reviewing, we will be granted a variance as part of the approval by default.
Okay, so the motion before us is to take from the table SLU 1-2020. Would the clerk please call the roll? Just to clarify, a vote yes means you're putting it in front of us, not voting yes for the SLU at this time. Sorry, Mr. Clerk.
No, that's fine. Councilmember Betts.
Yes.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Yes.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Okay. Now the resolution is again before the council.
Okay, so we have a motion to pass SLU 1-2020 offered by Councilmember Spitzley. Any further discussion with that clarification? Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
On adoption of the resolution, Councilmember Betts.
Yes.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Yes.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
No.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
No.
6 yeas, 2 nays, the resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Okay, then with that, we are to registration for public comment on city government related matters. So please raise your hands while we go through the referrals in the meantime. We have, and again, on a phone, *9 to raise your hand, on a Mac, Option Y, and on Windows, Alt Y. And we are to reports of city officers, boards, and commissions.
Okay, a motion from Councilmember Hussein, Vice President Hussein.
I move that all items be considered as being read in full and the proper referrals be made by the president.
Thank you. All those in favor, sorry, Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
On the motion to allow referrals, Councilmember Betts.
Aye.
Councilmember Dunbar.
Yes.
Councilmember Garza.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Spatafor.
Yes.
Councilmember Spitzley.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
8 yeas, 0 nays, the motion is adopted. So we have letters from the city clerk regarding minutes of boards, commissions, and authorities.
Place that on file.
Tri-County Regional Planning Commission fiscal year 2019 audit.
The Committee on Intergovernmental Relations.
And mayoral executive directives regarding discretionary spending and city restrictions on hiring.
Place on file.
Letters from the mayor regarding the appointment of Versi Williams to the Human Relations Community Services Board.
Committee of the Whole.
The appointment of Cheryl Tennis to the Human Relations Community Services Board.
Committee of the Whole.
The Comprehensive Development Agreement Amendment to Continental Ferguson Red Cedar Development.
Committee of the Whole.
Appointment of Jody Washington to the Human Relations and Community Services Board.
Committee of the Whole.
A grant acceptance, Stop Violence Against Women grant.
Ways and Means.
Supplemental appropriation grant acceptance for HOD's Emergency Solutions Grant and Community Development Block Grant.
It's passed by the council. We'll place it on file.
Z1 2020, the 300 block of North Capitol Avenue.
Development and Planning.
And SLU 2 of 2020, special land use permit to allow a 5-level parking ramp.
Development and Planning.
SLU 3 of 2020, a special land use permit to allow a LCC to construct a new 3-level parking ramp.
Development and Planning.
Appointment of Jennifer Poplar to the Park Board.
Committee of the Whole.
Appointment of Mike Dombrowski to the Park Board.
Committee of the Whole.
And the appointment of Kimberly Whitfield to the Park Board.
Committee of the Whole.
And communications and petitions, a notice from Liquor Control Commission of the transfer of a SDD and SDM license from Stockbridge to 6030 South Pennsylvania.
General Services.
And we are to remarks by council members.
Any council members wishing to make remarks, please raise your hand. Seeing none, moving on. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
And remarks by the mayor.
Mr. Mayor? Nada.
Then we're to public comments, and I don't
see any public comment. There's a few people here that aren't members of city staff, but I think the issues they want to address are on other meetings. So with that, I think we can move on.
Okay. That is the end of our agenda.
All right, at 9:36, I want to thank you all for a productive meeting, and we will see you on Zoom in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.